Ah, you again. Welcome. Take a seat. You will surely know what happened next to the von Carstein dynasty. Let me remember, what did we stop last time? The whole Southern Empire was already under the control of von Carstein. Vlad was preparing anew for the war against Reichland, and Isabella was on her way to support him. Stefan was dealing with the dwarfs of Karak here, and the vampires Elsbeth von Draken was on her way to find a warp meteor to allow Vlad to recharge his magic ring. But even his ring was weakened, and Isabella was still too far away. Vlad decided himself to attack. After all, what would a bunch of humans do against the ruler of the night himself? Vlad took over Grunberg, the most eastern village in Reichland, and though the gates to Aldorf were opened, next day Vlad could start with a siege. But the Empire wasn't unprepared. Forces under the control of Karl Franz himself, and even some fanatics under the control of the Grand Theogonist of Sigma, Volkmar the Grim, attacked forces of Vlad in Grunburg. But the protection of Sigma didn't save humans. Von Carstein started a counterattack to punish Karl Franz, who rushed his forces in an attack without waiting for the reinforcement. Emmanuel destroyed human formation with her magic and helped Vlad by fighting the Emperor of the Humanity. After Karl Franz fell motionless to the ground, troops of Vlad charged into the second part of the living army. The faith of Volkmar the Grim wasn't shaken, but his gods did not help him by staying alive. The ruler of Sylvania killed the rest of the retreating army and besieged Altdorf. However, Isabella was on her way to capture Übersreich first, and Vlad was driven away by an army that came back to protect the capital city of the empire. Meanwhile, those of Karakin took back the Migdal Wangalbarak and destroyed Grenzstadt. And neither destroyed settlement, Stefan met dwarfs. Overestimating the strength due to drunkenness, the bearded ones attacked the undead army. Vampire General decided again to take a battle at the choke point, to be able to use his best weapon, Mortis Engine. At the start of the battle, Skeletonites and underdogs bypassed dwarf troops and were looking at the rear. Mortis Engine was again a key to the victory against David, but that wasn't easy. Stefan was badly wounded to the thigh, but that doesn't stop him by taking Migdal Wangalbarak and resettling Grenzstadt. The Southern Dwarf problem was solved. but there were many other dwarfs on the vampire borders to deal with. Isabella besieged and attacked Ubersheim. At the time, Vlad was guarding the way between Altdorf and the village to cut off any possible reinforcement. This siege was a long one. Skeletons used siege tower made of dead corpses to arrive at the walls. Bats were dealing with archers, and Isabella the Seven were haunting the living from the heavens. And after dealing with mortars and the general, it was only a question of the time. When will the men retreat against lords of the night? After this important victory, Vlad besieged Altdorf again, and Isabella joined him without having any rest after the last battle. And there was Vlad von Carstein again. Altdorf. He could ever remember a place where he fell down the walls. It was centuries ago. Now there are living other humans, but in the place is the same throne. Von Carstein throne. He rushed into an attack without waiting for Isabella. Cannon shots were exploding in the dead zone, but they kept marching. A rain of bullets and arrows flew into the vampires, which were blocked by their armor or did almost no harm to the dead body. He claimed as the first one the walls up without any gear. Emmanuel was already landed on him and frightened as living with a magical power. The rest of the army was moving forward under heavy losses. Wargaze and the masters had the walls under their control in the shortest time. At this time, Isabella and Sevon arrived on the battlefield as well. Isabella's bats launched a suicidal attack in the attempt to silence enemy artillery. They survived only by luck. Meanwhile, the troops of Undead were going down the walls in the city to fight enemy infantry. Isabel and Sevon were hunting human officers, and Vlad with his troops took the fights on the streets against the cavalry, rushing always forward by the covering of Vargheists. And the tide of Undead stormed the central square, and people could not do anything about it. The city belongs now to von Carstein. From now and forever. After taking Altdorf, Vlad went to Helmgard with his army. But no battle was necessary, for the garrison saw the real emperor and laid down their arms. When his troops were rebuilding the fortress for vampires, Vlad received a message from Elsfeld that the meteor had been found. She warned that she felt a strong necromantic power here, but she saw no one, and her master had to be prepared for a fight. Vlad gathered his army and activated the teleportation artifact. And in fact, a small army was spotted, which was under the control of a Ghoul King, who drained up itself with the dark warpstone energy.
Mine puppets! Do me this deed! Purge the area of insects, so thy master can collect this warpstone unchallenged. Ha! If my memory serves, then I sought out such material in Mordheim some centuries ago. Halcyon days, when my minions hunted Wieldstone, and the Empire was in ruins, as it will be again. Fetch me the head of this Strigoi! I would have this nuisance quashed!
Vlad has charged an attack. The living had Mortis' engine as their target. Skeletons had to tie up the enemy in battle when Vlad was about to kill the Strigoi. And then something unexpected happened. Because the vampire abomination was overflowing with magical energy, his army rose and rose again, stronger and stronger than before. Vlad's troops were now only encircling enemies and gain some time, so that Vlad could execute the Ghoul King. And after that creature was dead, huge amounts of magic were unleashed and shredded the dead body apart. Vlad's ring soaked up all of this energy, and a magical reaction was released. Soon, it will restructure its enchantment matrix and start working again. But it will take time. Shortly after that moment, Vlad was surprisingly teleported back to the artifact used, just to see that the thing is now broken and useless. Disappointed, the vampire lord was back to his management business. After Karl Franz's follower no longer existed, another problem had to be solved. Some elves enslaved and occupied lands of the Empire. They had to be chased away. When Isabella reached Koroborg, they had already left the settlement, took everyone with them, made them slaves, and burned all they did so as not to strengthen the army of the dead. But Vlad could catch them in Alhart. His army was still weakened after the battle with the Ghoul King, and his ring was still charging. But this attack was necessary to protect his lands. Elves had a small number of raiders there, but surprisingly, they had a lizard creatures there, which makes Vlad remember the time when he was in Hekara, and hunter tribes sometimes hunted such creatures. In any case, they all had to die. Vlad killed a manticore, endured this lizard, and killed an elven beastmaster. In that time, Emanuel's magic destroyed half of the elven army. The rest of the work was done by the Wargeists. Elves fled. But is it possible to flee in the land of the dead, where countless ghouls, giant bats, and monstrous wolves live outside of every village? At that time, Stefan arrived at the east of Sylvania and secured the borders by conquering the legendary dwarf waters, Kara Kadrin, home of the Slayers. Stefan took advantage of a moment when the Slayer King and his army were elsewhere and quickly struck. He managed to tie enemy troops on the walls with skeletons. And fell behind the walls, through the gates broken by crypt horrors. Vampires and his necromancer could go behind the defensive lines. Captain von Draak could cast a very long spell that weakened all enemies and frightened even a brave heart. After that, all the dwarves, except Slayers, began to flee. And after dealing with these crazy short-legged creatures, they took over the entire settlement. In Karakadrin, Stefan's fear were confirmed. They had no knowledge and no way of reviving dwarf skeletons, zombies, or even turning them into vampires. Their natural resistance to magic made it nearly impossible. He was only supposed to revive a few skeletons that followed him everywhere to prove his power. Von Carstein in general only hoped no one would notice how weak and unstable they were compared to the rest of his army. While Vlad was busy restoring Eilhart at his discretion, an envoy from Bretonia arrived at his court. He announced to von Carstein that Chilfroy de Artois had declared war on him. In response, Vlad only laughed. Also, he did not care about the Britannians, but he was interested in Marienburg, which was currently under the Artois coat of arms. Though this war is not a waste of time. A few hours after the departure of the messenger, Vlad received a vision that an army of Bretonia, numbering almost 1,500, was approaching the village. Vlad's troops have not yet recovered from the battle with the Ghoul King and elves, and apparently the Bretons felt his weakness. It's always so funny how food and new records for his army, without suspecting anything, are sent to his hands. When the enemy's vanguard approached and stood in anticipation of the rest of the army, Vlad, with the help of his favorite technique, was literally in front of them. This instilled confusion in the ranks of the enemy, which Emmanuel took advantage of and caused a vortex leading into the pit above the crowded troops. From the blow, the enemy army was no longer able to recover morally. A couple of seconds after the battle with the skeletons, realizing that they could not defeat the undead army, they rushed to flee. The approaching detachments of archers fired several volleys, but realizing that they were left without cover, they fled from the battlefield, leaving their leader to be torn apart by the monster. Vlad did not want to let them go just like that, and for his enjoyment, he began to hunt them like animals, killing one group after another. And having cleared the way, he sent his troops to Marienburg to take the city by storming until the enemy recovered. The Marienburg garrison was not ready for battle and only fled after seeing the banners of the Empire of the Night. Isabella decided to expel the elves completely from the lands of the Empire, and she sent her troops to the last settlement that they occupied in Midland, Weismund. But these cowardly raiders fled again, hoping to get to their home alive. Do the elves really believe that in the lands of the undead they will be allowed to survive? Fools. Stefan at this time was making his way through the snowy reaches of the northern Edgeworld Mountains. Spies of Caton von Drag, undead crows, saw an army of dwarves rushing to capture the fortress. After hesitating, Stefan decided to attack the troops tired of transition instead of ambushing them. Melissa Rachtep gave the blood kiss to an aristocrat named Carla, and the latter joined Stefan's campaign. And the coming battle was the moment when she shone. Von Carstein's general did not manage to attack at the choke point as he was accustomed to, and had to fight in the open field. And as in every battle against dwarves, Morty's engine had a key role. By slowly sucking the life power, Melissa used her magic powers again and again to weaken Davy forces. That was a hard and a long battle. Slayers are famous for seeking death, and here they found it. After the victory, von Drag warned Stefan that there is a second army nearby, and the vampire general planned a fallback if they will attack, to regroup and let them suffer from the undead horrors awakened by necromancers. As he expected, the dwarven army attacked. Stefan retreated, but suddenly the dwarves were faster than he thought, and they overtook him again. He had to fight. To survive, Stefan used all his skill in controlling the undead. He even had to run to Cadon's help in order to rally the ranks of skeletons as closely as possible, hiding himself, Carla, and the necromancer behind a wall of bones. Dwarves, seeing this formation, decided to fire at the enemy with crossbows before attacking. Cadon had to lose them out by casting the most terrible spell on them, the Wind of Death. Realizing that the undead would use magic in a ranged fight, the Slayers rushed to the attack. Undead knights and direwolves took care of shooting dwarves to protect the Mortis engine. The rest of the army was fighting Slayers and their king. Angrim Ironfist himself ran into vampires and injured them badly. Carla was almost ripped apart by his axe. Stefan lost his hand. Cadon was killed, and that before he could manifest himself as a lich. At this point, the vampire lord has a feeling the battle is lost. His friend is dead, his main weapon is destroyed, but ghosts that he took under his control in the mountains grabbed the victory out of dwarf's hands. After it was over, Carla, even almost dead, was able to restore the matrix of Mortis' engine. Stefan tried to revive Cadon von Drag, but he was not as good in necromancy, and the only thing he achieved to revive some skeletons, but not the necromancer. His soul was gone. And now, the war with dwarves turned to be very personal for von Carstein. He will never find rest till he personally killed all of them. He smashed the remains of the Kadrin clan. And destroyed all remains left of them. Vlad, in this time, smashed invaders from Artois and secured borders of the empire. And Isabel was patrolling the borders in Midland. And though the era of free humans was slowly ending, most of the empire was still free of the bane of vampires. Bretonia was strong and independent. Some elves were still raiding the empire's land. Dwarves and orcs had their never-ending war against each other. And so, Vlad von Carstein, the Lord of the Night, the Shepherd of humanity, took care of troubled lands of the Old World, and brought eternal peace to them. At this point, I would like to take a break. My sources may fool me, but Karl Franz, also called as Heldenhammer, should be the protector of this land, and he is allied with undead at some point to protect his lands. But this story, it's the other one. Like, I found a world which is a reflection in a false mirror of a world that I wanted to tell you first. And I still got the information about it. Come back in a week or two, and I'll continue my story. Till then, be well, my young fellow.